In the final year of World War II, the Pacific Ocean was a battlefield echoing with distant explosions and the dull thunder of artillery. Amid the chaos, Captain Allison of the United States Marines found himself fighting for survival. His unit had been caught off guard by a sudden Japanese assault, and the attack shattered their formation in minutes. Allison managed to break away from the gunfire and dive toward the shoreline, where a small rubber raft lay half buried in the sand. With no time to think, he pushed it into the water and paddled with all the strength he had left. Behind him, the shouts of soldiers faded into the roar of the ocean. For days he drifted alone, carried by unpredictable currents. The sun scorched him by day, and the cold winds bit at him by night. His supplies were gone, and exhaustion settled into his bones. Yet he clung to the raft, refusing to surrender to the endless blue horizon. By the time he spotted a distant shape on the waterline, a dark smudge that slowly sharpened into the outline of land, he could hardly believe his eyes. Gathering the last reserves of his strength, he steered the raft toward the island, hoping that whatever awaited him there would be kinder than the sea. The raft scraped against the pale sand with a soft hiss, waking Allison from the haze of exhaustion. For a long moment he simply lay there, listening to the rhythmic crash of waves and the rustling of wind through unfamiliar trees. After days adrift, the solid earth beneath him felt unreal. Pushing himself upright, he dragged the battered raft farther ashore in case he needed it again. The beach stretched in both directions, empty and silent. No voices, no footsteps, no smoke rising into the sky, just an untouched wilderness that seemed to belong to no one. Allison scanned the tree line, hopping for any sign of human life. With slow, unsteady steps he moved inland, brushing aside hanging vines and stepping over fallen branches. The island was lush, thick with vegetation, but strangely quiet. He couldn't hear the sound of birds or animals, only the wind sighing through the leaves. Then something unexpected caught his eye, a small wooden structure standing alone among the trees. As he moved closer, he realized it wasn't a hut or a shed. It was a church, weathered by the elements but still intact. Its simple cross, though worn, remained upright on the roof. Approaching cautiously, Allison pushed open the door. Inside, the dim light revealed rows of benches, a modest altar, and the faint scent of incense lingering in the air. But what startled him most was the figure emerging from a side room, a young woman wearing a nun's habit. She froze when she saw him, eyes wide with fear. Allison lifted his hand slightly, trying to calm her. "Please," he said gently, "don't be afraid, I'm American." For a long moment she said nothing, her breath unsteady. Then, in a quiet voice, she replied, I thought I was alone here." Allison studied her pale, worried expression. "How many people live on this island?" "Only me," she answered. "There's no one else." The words unsettled him, but her tone carried no doubt. Whatever had happened here, she really had been living entirely on her own. Seeing his exhaustion, she motioned for him to follow. "Come, you look like you need rest." And with that, Allison stepped out of the ruins of the little church and followed the mysterious woman into the depths of the island, not yet knowing how intertwined their fates were about to become. Angela led Allison along a narrow path that wound between palms and towering ferns. The humid air pressed against them, and the faint echo of the ocean faded as they moved deeper into the island. After a short walk, they reached a small clearing where a modest shelter made of woven leaves and driftwood stood beneath the trees. "Please," Angela said softly, gesturing toward a seat made from a fallen log. "Rest here." Allison sat heavily, grateful for the moment of stillness. Angela handed him a small portion of fruit she had gathered earlier. As he ate, she settled across from him, her expression calm but shadowed with memories she hadn't yet spoken aloud. "You asked how I came to be alone here," she began. "It wasn't meant to be this way." She clasped her hands in her lap as she continued. "I arrived on this island with a priest. Our mission was simple. We were to help several elderly members of the clergy escape the Japanese soldiers who were moving across the region. We thought we were coming to a safe place." Her eyes drifted toward the distant treetops. as if she were seeing the past unfold there. But when we reached the island, it was already too late. The Japanese had captured the very people we were sent to help. The priest and I stayed hidden, hopping for an opportunity to rescue them, but the danger was too great. She swallowed quietly before going on. We waited, we prayed, and then the priest fell ill. There were no medicines, no doctors, nothing that could save him. He grew weaker each day until... She paused, voice wavering only slightly. Until he passed away. Allison felt a weight in his chest. Surviving alone on an island was hard enough, but losing the last person by your side made it nearly unbearable. After he died, Angela continued, I stayed hidden. I had no choice. Everyone back home assumed I'd been taken by the Japanese as well. No one came to look for me, and with time, I accepted that this island might be where my mission would end. Her expression remained composed, but beneath it, Allison sensed the quiet resilience of someone who had endured more isolation than most people could imagine. I'm sorry, he said gently. You've been through so much. Angela managed a small, sad smile. We all carry our burdens, Captain. God gives us strength to bear them. For the first time since arriving, Allison felt a quiet understanding pass between them, a recognition that both had survived more than they had ever asked for. And though the island was still just as silent and remote, it no longer felt entirely empty. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy as Allison rested in the shade of Angela's small shelter. After a few moments of silence, she handed him a cup made from a hollowed coconut filled with cool water. He drank slowly, savoring every drop. You should regain your strength, Angela said gently. You've been drifting for days. Your body needs time. Allison nodded. You're right. I didn't think I'd make it this far. Angela studied him quietly, and after a moment she said, You mentioned your group was attacked. How did you manage to escape? He exhaled, eyes fixed on the ground. We were ambushed. Everything happened in seconds, gunfire, shouting, chaos. I don't even know how many got out. His hand tightened around the cup. I ran toward the shore, found a raft. After that, it was just water and luck keeping me alive. Angela bowed her head respectfully, acknowledging the loss without asking him to relive more than he wanted. You're safe now, she said softly. For a while they simply sat, letting the stillness of the island settle around them. Eventually, Angela rose to her feet. We should find more food, she suggested. Fruit won't keep us going for long. Allison pushed himself up. Lead the way. They ventured into the forest, sunlight flickering through the leaves above them. Angela pointed out clusters of ripe fruit she had learned to recognize over her months of survival. Allison climbed a tall palm and knocked down coconuts, tossing them carefully to her as she gathered them in a woven basket. He laughed once, breathless. Never thought I'd be doing this on some forgotten island. Angela smiled faintly. God provides in unexpected ways. But fruit alone wasn't enough. As they reached the shore again, Allison noticed something moving beneath the water, a large sea turtle drifting lazily near the shallows. That, he said, pointing, is real food. Angela looked uncertain. I've never tried to catch one. I have an idea, he replied, grabbing some rope and a piece of driftwood to use as a pole. He dragged the raft into the water, and after a moment's hesitation, Angela stepped in beside him. They paddled quietly toward the turtle, trying to stay unseen. But the creature was faster than it looked. When Allison lunged, the turtle thrashed, and in the struggle he slipped straight into the water with a splash. Captain, Angela called, leaning over to grab his arm. Laughing and sputtering, Allison hauled himself back onto the raft. I'm fine, but I'm not letting that thing beat me. With Angela's help, steady hands, calm instructions, and surprising grit, they finally managed to secure the turtle and guide it toward shore. By sunset, a fire crackled near the shelter, and Allison roasted the turtle meat with the skill of someone practiced at field survival. He ate gratefully, feeling strength slowly return to his limbs. We can manage here, he said between bites. This island may not look like much, but it has everything we need. Even if no one comes for us, we won't starve. Angela listened quietly. Do you have anyone waiting for you back home? Allison shook his head. No family. I grew up in an orphanage until I was 14. After school, the military gave me a purpose. Angela looked surprised. I'm an orphan too, she said softly. I chose the church because faith gave me direction, something steady to hold on to. Their eyes met, and for the first time since they'd crossed paths, the island didn't feel like a prison or a battlefield. It felt like a place where two lonely souls could finally speak without walls between them. The following morning began peacefully. Soft light filtered through the trees, and the island seemed almost calm, as if pretending the world beyond it wasn't at war. Allison was tightening the rope on the raft frame while Angela gathered fallen coconuts nearby. A distant hum vibrated through the air, at first faint, almost like the sound of an insect. Allison froze. The noise grew louder, sharper, unmistakable. He lifted his head. That's an engine, he said quietly. Angela looked up, confusion turning into fear as the roar intensified above the treetops. Through a break in the canopy, a dark silhouette swept across the sky, a Japanese fighter plane, circling the island in a slow, deliberate pattern. Allison, she whispered. Get down, he ordered gently but firmly. He guided her toward the cover of the trees, crouching low. The aircraft made another pass, and Allison watched its movement with tense concentration. They're scouting, he muttered. If they spot us, we're finished. Angela clasped her hands together instinctively, though she said nothing. When the sound finally faded into the distance, Allison didn't relax. Instead, he looked toward the thick forest inland. We can't stay out in the open anymore, he said. They'll be back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will. Angela nodded, trusting his judgment. Where can we go? I found a cave on the other side of the ridge yesterday, big enough to hide in. It's not comfortable, but it's safe. Without hesitation, Angela gathered the few supplies she had. They moved quickly, staying under the cover of branches, avoiding exposed paths, listening for any hint of engines returning. The cave lay hidden behind a rocky outcropping, partially concealed by hanging vines. When they reached it, Allison peered inside first, checking the shadows before motioning Angela in. The interior was cool and dim, with just enough space for the two of them to sit and store their belongings. This will do, Allison said, forcing a small smile. At least for now. Angela settled onto a flat stone, letting out a quiet breath. Do you think they know someone is here? I hope not, he replied. But until we're sure, we stay low. No fires outside, no wandering, just patience. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The cave was silent except for the distant crash of waves. Angela finally broke the quiet. Thank you for keeping us safe. Allison shook his head. We'll keep each other safe. The first shadow of danger had passed, but both of them sensed it wouldn't be the last. They spent most of the day inside the cave, listening to the steady rhythm of the island, the wind, the waves, and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. The quiet felt tense rather than peaceful, as though the island itself was holding its breath. By early morning the next day, a low rumble rolled through the air. At first it sounded like distant thunder, but Allison instantly recognized it wasn't from the sky. That's not weather, he said, moving toward the entrance of the cave. Angela remained still, watching him with worried eyes. Carefully, Allison stepped just far enough outside to get a view between the rocks. In the distance, several dark shapes appeared in the sky, Japanese planes approaching in formation. His heart tightened. Get back, he whispered. Stay close to the wall. A moment later, the first explosion shook the ground. The entire island trembled. Angela covered her ears as the sound echoed through the cave, loud and overwhelming. The bombing continued, blasts rolling one after another, shaking dust loose from the cave ceiling. Angela pressed her forehead to her clasped hands and whispered a prayer, her voice trembling. It's going to be all right, Allison said softly, moving closer to steady her. We'll stay hidden. They're targeting the coast, not the ridge. For several minutes, the bombardment continued. When the final echoes faded, a heavy silence followed, broken only by Angela's unsteady breathing. Allison waited, listening for any sign of returning aircraft. When he heard none, he slowly stepped outside again. What he saw made him pause. Trees along the shoreline were scorched, and a column of smoke curled upward where their small shelter had once stood. The church Angela had guarded for so long was reduced to pieces, its walls collapsed, its roof gone. Angela walked out beside him, stopping when she saw the ruins. Her hand covered her mouth as she tried to absorb the sight. The place where she had prayed every day, the last connection to her old life, had vanished in a matter of moments. "Allison," she whispered, her voice shaking. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry." Before she could speak again, a new sound approached, the steady hum of engines, lower and heavier than the aircraft before. Both of them ducked behind a large rock as several Japanese landing craft appeared offshore. A group of soldiers disembarked, moving inland with equipment and crates. Within minutes, they began setting up what looked like a weather station. "They're establishing a base," Allison murmured. "They'll be here for a while." Angela's expression tightened with fear. "What do we do?" "We hide," he said, "and we stay careful." One more blow came as the soldiers found Allison's raft on the beach. They inspected it briefly, then destroyed it, tearing apart the last means he had of leaving the island. Angela flinched as the sound of breaking wood reached them. Allison's jaw set. "That settles it," he said quietly. "We stay in the cave until we figure out our next move." Together, they slipped back toward the forest, moving silently as the soldiers spread across the beach. The island was no longer empty, and for now, it was no longer theirs. The days that followed settled into a quiet, tense routine. The cave became their refuge, cool, shadowed, and hidden well enough that Japanese patrols rarely came close. Allison checked the entrance frequently, listening for footsteps or voices before letting Angela move about. Food quickly became their greatest concern. They had no shelter left, no safe place to cook openly, and the soldiers scavenged the shoreline often. But they had to survive, and that meant taking risks. At dusk, when the light began to fade, Allison ventured out to the forest edge. Angela stayed deeper inside the cave, waiting anxiously until she heard his return. Sometimes he brought fruit he had managed to gather unseen. Other times he came back empty-handed, frustrated but unharmed. One evening, determined to find something more substantial, Allison tried fishing along the rocky shore. He kept low, avoiding open stretches of beach. When a few soldiers passed nearby, he lay still among the stones until they moved on, pretending to be nothing more than part of the landscape. Only after they left did he manage to catch a single fish. Back at the cave, Angela tried to eat with him, but the moment she tasted the meat, her stomach rebelled. She had avoided meat since becoming a nun, and after months of surviving on plants, her body couldn't handle it. Minutes later, she grew nauseated and had to stop eating altogether. Allison helped her sit down, worried. "You need food," he said gently. "We'll find something else for you tomorrow." Angela nodded, but the weakness in her movements showed how little energy she had left. That night, as she slept fitfully, Allison realized he needed to take a bigger risk. The Japanese camp had supplies, food, blankets, anything that might help her recover, but going near it was dangerous. Still, when Angela whispered his name in her sleep, shivering despite the warm air, he made up his mind. After dark, he smeared ash on his face to blend with the shadows and crept toward the camp. He moved slowly and kept low, watching every torch and every patrol route. When he spotted a storage area left momentarily unattended, he slipped behind a stack of crates and searched for anything useful. He found a small bag with food, just enough to help them for a few days. But before he could retreat, he heard footsteps approaching. With no time to run, he pressed himself into a narrow space between crates, holding his breath as a soldier walked past. Minutes crawled by like hours. Only when the camp quieted again did Allison manage to slip out and disappear back into the forest. By dawn, Angela awoke and found him gone. Fear gripped her chest. She whispered a prayer, imagining the worst, that the soldiers had found him, that he had been captured or worse. When Allison finally appeared at the cave entrance, scratched by branches but alive, Angela couldn't hide the relief that washed over her. "Allison," she said sharply, though her voice trembled, "don't ever leave without telling me again." "I know," he replied softly. "I'm sorry, I had to get something for us." He placed the bag in front of her. For a moment, she stared at it, then at him. Her anger melted into gratitude. "We'll make it," Allison said. "Both of us, I promise." And for the first time since the soldiers arrived, Angela believed him. In the days that followed Allison's dangerous trip to the Japanese camp, life in the cave became a little easier. With the food he'd managed to bring back, Angela regained some strength, and the color slowly returned to her face. Allison, relieved to see her improving, made it his mission to lift her spirits whenever he could. One morning, after foraging near the ridge, he returned with a small white flower and a simple wooden comb he had carved from a piece of driftwood. "These are for you," he said almost shyly. Angela blinked in surprise. She took the comb gently, tracing the smooth lines with her fingers. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you." Allison hesitated, then asked, "Have you ever thought about living differently? I mean, not as a nun, just as yourself." Angela looked at him with calm, thoughtful eyes. "I haven't taken my final vows yet. The church gives us several years to decide, but my heart has always leaned toward that path." He nodded, but something unspoken hung in the air between them. Later that same day, as the sun dipped low, distant voices drifted through the trees. Peering from the cave entrance, Allison saw small groups of Japanese soldiers removing equipment, carrying crates toward the boats. "They're leaving," he whispered. Angela joined him, her eyes widening with relief. In a matter of hours, the shoreline was quiet again. Only the empty camp remained, with leftovers and supplies scattered about. The pressure that had weighed on them for so long finally loosened. That evening, with newfound freedom and food no longer scarce, Allison felt safe enough to speak his heart. He sat beside Angela outside the cave, watching the stars emerge one by one. "I've been alone most of my life," he said quietly. "No family, no home waiting for me. I've learned to survive, but I've never really been happy." Angela listened, without interrupting. "But being here with you," he continued, "even in danger. Even with everything we've faced, I feel something I've never felt before. When this war ends, I want a real life, and I'd like that life to be with you." Angela's breath caught. She stared at him, stunned, not because of the words themselves, but because of the sincerity behind them. "Allison," she said carefully, "I care for you, truly, but I've given my heart to God. I can't break that promise, not even for someone I admire." He went quiet. The rejection wasn't harsh, but it struck deeply. Still, he forced a small nod. "I didn't mean to pressure you. I just needed you to know." Angela reached out, touching his hand lightly. "You haven't hurt me, but the path you want and the path I must follow, they're different." That night, while gathering leftover supplies from the abandoned camp, Allison found a sealed bottle among the scattered crates. Exhausted, emotionally drained, and not thinking clearly, he opened it. By the time he returned to the cave, he had drunk far too much. Angela frowned when she saw him swaying slightly. "Allison, what happened?" He sat heavily on a rock, still holding the bottle. "I'm fine," he muttered. "Better than fine. Look at us, alone on an island like the first people on Earth. Who needs vows? Who needs rules? This could have been simple." The words weren't cruel, but they hit Angela like a cold wave. He wasn't himself. His voice sounded distant, careless. "Allison," she said quietly, "please stop." He gave a strange laugh. "You and your promises, pretending this island is a chapel instead of what it really is." A hurt expression crossed Angela's face. Without another word, she stood up, stepped out into the rain that had begun to fall, and disappeared into the darkness of the trees. It took Allison a moment to realize she was gone. When he did, The anger in his chest dissolved instantly, replaced by fear and regret. "Angela," he called, stumbling into the forest. But the rain swallowed his voice, and the night hid every trace of her steps. He searched until exhaustion forced him to stop. Only as dawn broke did he finally find her lying among the ferns, unconscious from the cold and the storm. "All right," he whispered, carefully lifting her in his arms. "I've got you. I won't fail you again." He didn't know what waited for them back at the cave. He didn't know the soldiers would return. But at that moment, all he cared about was bringing her back to safety. Allison carried Angela carefully through the damp undergrowth, her small frame almost weightless, yet her frailty made every step tense. The forest was quiet, but the stillness was deceptive. From the distance, he could hear the low hum of soldiers preparing their camp again. Time was short. He managed to get her back to the cave, laying her gently on a bed of leaves. Her breathing was shallow, and her pale skin reminded him of how critical her condition had become. He knew he couldn't let her suffer in the cave any longer. They needed warmth, medicine, and blankets, all of which were still in the Japanese camp. Steeling himself, Allison planned his next move. Darkness would be his ally. He crept toward the camp, keeping low, blending with the shadows. Each step was measured, each pause calculated. The soldiers moved about, unaware of his presence, and Allison reached the storage area where he had seen supplies before. Among the crates, he found blankets, bandages, and a small satchel of medicines. Relief surged, but it was short-lived. A soldier noticed movement. Allison froze, heart pounding. The man's eyes swept past, almost catching him, but then Allison slipped into the shadows, barely escaping detection. Back at the cave, Allison worked quickly. He wrapped Angela in dry blankets, changed her wet clothing, and gave her the medicine he had retrieved. For the first time, kneeling beside her in the dim cave light, he whispered a quiet prayer, asking for guidance, for protection, for strength. Angela stirred the next morning, blinking slowly as consciousness returned. "Who?" she asked weakly, noticing her dry clothes and the blankets around her. "I did," Allison admitted gently. "You needed help. I couldn't risk waiting." Her eyes softened, and for a long moment she said nothing. She sensed the courage and care it had taken for him to go alone into enemy territory. I'm sorry," he continued, lowering his gaze. "About the things I said last night. I never meant to hurt you." Angela managed a faint smile. "You scared me," she said softly, "but I forgive you." They were about to settle into a tense, quiet morning when the familiar roar of aircraft and explosions shattered the air once again. Allison's heart sank. The Japanese were bombing the island, likely searching for something or punishing those who had interfered with their camp. He quickly explained to Angela what had happened. The soldiers must have discovered some trace of his nighttime raid. Angela listened, horrified, covering her face with trembling hands and whispering prayers for mercy. Soon the Japanese soldiers advanced toward the cave. Their shouts and threats filled the forest. They warned that grenades would be thrown if no one emerged. The two huddled together, fear gripping every fiber of their bodies. Angela prayed, certain that their end had come. Then, without warning, the ground shook under heavy bombardment. Explosions rumbled, sending tremors through the trees, and the Japanese soldiers panicked, their screams lost amid the chaos. Allison realized what was happening. The American Navy had begun attacking the island. He grabbed Angela's hand. "This is our chance," he said. "We have to move, stay close." They rushed to the cave entrance and witnessed American planes striking Japanese positions. Relief and hope surged through them both, but Allison's sharp eyes spotted the danger that remained. The Japanese had hidden several large guns across the island, making the Navy's landing perilous. "We can't just wait," he said, determination hardening his voice. "I need to stop those guns." Angela hesitated, then nodded, placing her hand over his. "Go, you have my blessing, I'll be safe here." With that, Allison set off, disappearing into the chaos of the battlefield, ready to confront the dangers that stood between the American Navy and the island's liberation. Allison moved quickly across the uneven terrain, dodging debris and fallen branches. The island was a battlefield now, smoke and explosions clouding the sky, but he focused on the Japanese artillery positions hidden among rocks and trees. Each gun threatened the safe landing of the American Navy, and he knew he had no choice but to act. He crept from one gun emplacement to another, carefully avoiding detection. When he found an opportunity, he disabled each weapon one by one, cutting wires, jamming mechanisms, anything that would prevent them from firing. Each move carried risk, but Allison pressed on, driven by the knowledge that American lives depended on his actions. By the third emplacement, a sudden shout startled him. A soldier had spotted him. Allison reacted quickly, using his surroundings to escape detection. He managed to neutralize the immediate threat without unnecessary violence, then disappeared into the trees. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to keep moving. Hours passed in tense silence, each moment a battle of nerve and strategy. When he finally reached the last hidden gun, he disabled it with careful precision, feeling a surge of relief. Though his body ached from exertion, he had completed his task. From a high ridge, Allison watched the American Navy cease bombing and begin landing safely on the island. Relief flooded him as soldiers disembarked, moving with purpose to secure the area. The threat from the hidden guns had been neutralized, and the island was finally under friendly control. He made his way back through the smoke and chaos to the cave where Angela waited. Seeing her safe and unharmed lifted a weight from his chest. Despite the battlefield all around them, a quiet sense of hope settled in. Angela rushed to him, tending to his minor injuries and offering a comforting presence. "You did it," she said softly. "The guns are gone. They can land safely." Allison nodded, exhausted but determined. "It's over, at least for now. The Navy can take the island. Our part is done." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the chaos of the battlefield behind them and the promise of safety ahead. Though the war was not yet over and challenges would continue, they had survived together, both the island and their fears. The American Navy had finally secured the island. Their flag rose proudly above the shoreline, signaling victory and hope. Allison, battered and exhausted, was carried on a stretcher by the soldiers. When the commanding officer saw him alive, surprise and relief crossed his face. They had believed him lost in the chaos of the ambush months earlier. Angela followed closely behind, keeping pace with the stretcher. Her heart ached at the thought of parting, but she stayed composed, honoring the promise she had made to God and to herself. Allison looked at her, their eyes meeting in a quiet understanding. "It's time for us to say goodbye," he said softly. "We may never see each other again." Angela shook her head gently, tears welling in her eyes. "Even if we don't spend our lives together, you will always remain in my heart." He smiled faintly, grateful for her words. "Thank you for everything, for trusting me, for helping me survive. I've never been stronger or braver than I was with you by my side." They paused, watching the Navy stabilize the island. Soldiers moved with purpose, securing positions and tending to the wounded. The battle that had dominated their lives for so long was finally over, at least for this moment. Allison never asked Angela to abandon her faith or to return his love. He understood the depth of her commitment, just as she respected the life he had chosen and the sacrifices he had made. Their connection wasn't defined by proximity or romantic fulfillment, but by trust, care, and the shared ordeal that had brought them together. As the waves crashed gently against the shore and the sun began to rise over the horizon, Allison was lifted onto a Navy boat, disappearing into the distance. Angela stayed on the island, watching until the vessel was out of sight. Though separated, their hearts remained bound by the extraordinary experiences they had shared. The story of Allison and Angela reminded anyone who heard it that true love and respect aren't always about being together. Sometimes, it's about the courage to care for someone, to protect them, and to honor their choices, even when life pulls you in different directions. The island was quiet once more, but the memory of what had happened, and the bond they shared, would remain forever.